Hi, everybody. Okay, so I read the article Critical Conversations About Art, a description of higher order thinking generated through the study of art criticism. It was written by Candace Jessie Stout. It was also published in 1995. This article is sort of exactly what the title says. So essentially what the author is doing is she's examining how students formulate higher level thinking through conversational art criticism in a course. So it's actually it's a case study based on a teacher leading a course that's all about art criticism. And so through this study, she's asking basically, how does art education develop higher order and critical thinking? And also, is it possible to demonstrate the value of the contemporary shift in qualitative research away from the search for the universal in respect to the unique? So essentially, she's saying, she's talking about how and why we should research what learning is. And in learning what happens in a classroom, we're able to learn more about how to be more effective teachers and these various ways that we can have very higher level, very critical thinking, very organic classrooms. And the organic classroom is something that plays into the organic sort of model, plays into how she structures this case study. So essentially, she's examining if she's conducting research through this type of case study. Is this an effective method for gathering data, and can we gather sort of qualitative data by examining these various case studies where these curriculum structures are set in place specifically with the purpose of and the interest of generating higher level critical thinking in our students. So, can we generate data from this? Is it an effective method for examining how students learn? And then can we promote critical thinking through this specific type of structure that we're examining here? So essentially, the study is a case study, and she looks at 50 undergraduate pre-service art education students, and they're enrolled in a foundations course that's specifically about teaching art criticism at the secondary level. So I know there's kind of a lot of levels there. So it's, these are pre-service art teachers that are foundations course on how to teach critical art criticism. So several layers there. So they're learning about how to teach art criticism while they're simultaneously working on art criticism themselves. So I think that's sort of an important part of this too. So the data was collected qualitatively. So what she did was she actually gathered written and oral statements from the students. So some of the oral statements were obviously observations during courses, and then some were done, I believe, during interviews. And some of the written observations were part of the students' requirement to fill out a journal throughout the course. And so what they did was they separated the journal into two halves, and on one half they worked on their personal thoughts and insights as they were doing their research readings and homework throughout the course, and then they added things on the other side based on what happened during the actual course. So were the things they initially thought changed based on the various things that they experienced and discussed in the classroom? So the course itself operated mostly through conversation, and while the teacher sort of had an endpoint in mind, students were encouraged to sort of guide the course and guide the curriculum based on what they felt was important or what they found they would like to discuss during the course. I thought, she talks a lot about making this class seem very organic. So rather than having it be very structured and regimented, the teacher allowed the students to sort of lead things the way they wanted to lead them and participate very actively in sort of a very democratic classroom situation. So I believe that her intent in conducting this research was to see how complex critical discussions led in a pre-service context could create a situation for researching on how to generate higher level thinking in students based on various ages. So what she found through the research was that a lot of the students really sort of dove headfirst into conducting the research and participating actively in these discussions. And she said, though, a lot of what they discussed and how they discussed sort of operated in a way that we're pretty used to based on typical art classroom critical discussions. So, they examined artists' influences, elements, and principles. They did analysis, they did description. Students would say things that maybe they would never say aloud, so their journal sort of operated as a space for them to think very critically and say things that maybe they would be hesitant to share with their peers. So, she was saying that this organic model of criticism that's used in the study does sort of follow some traditional art education methods because, they're still observing, analyzing, interpreting, discussing. The difference is that the students from the outset understood that interpretation is open-ended and there are no set answers. So, the students didn't always come to an agreement about the discussion that they were, the work that they were leading, and sometimes someone was able to say, there was an example at the end when she was talking about a Faith Ringgold work called The Accident, and Faith Ringgold is giving a story or stating a story where someone went to, I think, Coney Island, and they're eating, and then the person passed away, and the students really internalized this very serious work, and at the end of the discussion someone said, "This is all of us," and she said that she felt that statement was so poignant that they didn't carry the discussion any further. So sometimes it ended up a very complex debate, and sometimes it was just sort of very one person sort of seemed to say everything that they needed to say. So I thought that generally this article I thought was in this case study was really important because I think that it demonstrates that the approach to conducting art criticism as something that's organic is really important, which is something sort of I've always kind of been taught and kind of felt was a very effective model for guiding this type of discussion. I think the more we know about effective models for generating higher complex thinking, the more likely we are able to, as teachers, generally foster this type of ethic within our classroom. So, the more complex thinking, discussing, and writing that we are able to foster in our classrooms, the better. So I thought that this was an effective strategy for gathering data, and I think it does contribute to the greater understanding and research in the field. So generally, I agreed with a lot that she had to say, and I think that her intent was very purposeful. I feel as though there was something else I want to say, but I can't remember. So yeah, generally, I thought that looking at this type of complex thinking from this way was a very insightful case study for her to conduct, because I think that it's really something that we as educators want to do. We want our students to be thinking, really constructively, really organically, be really ready and prepared to be able to write and then, contribute these writings within the course to a very multifaceted, multi-dimensional classroom environment. So I think if we can take, for me as an upcoming art educator, I think about, how can I incorporate this type of higher order thinking into sort of the other studio practices that I'm going to be requiring of my students. So in that way, I thought that was really useful. So thanks for listening.